Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast, made for women who want their healthiest years to be ahead of them, not behind them. Join your host, Courtney Townley, right now as she breaks down the fairy tale health story you have been chasing all of your life into sensible action steps and lasting change. Welcome to the Grace and Grit podcast. This is your host, Courtney Townley. As always, thank you so much for taking time to be here. How's 2020 going for you so far? Well, if it's been a rough start, I want to remind you to be nice to yourself. And if you're a frequent listener of the show, you know that I'm a fan of kind of looking at the long view, right? I'm a fan of playing the long game. Because meaningful change does not happen in a few days or a few weeks or even a few months. Honestly, for many, it doesn't even happen in a year. And I know starting off the podcast saying that, some of you might be like, oh, she's being Debbie Downer today. But I'm not. I'm just reminding you of having reasonable expectations for how the change process actually works. Because I know a lot of women charge into the new year expecting to totally revolutionize their life in January. And by the end of January, many women are starting to stand face to face with the reality that that's just not the way it works. And you can take that reality and use it to beat yourself up and tell yourself lots of stories about your inabilities and why you're not going to succeed. Please don't do that. Take that reality to remind you of your humanity, that change is a process that takes time, energy, and effort over a long period of time. And of course, I'm talking about meaningful change, deep change. You can get a lot of superficial change in a short period of time. But I hope that you want so much more than that for your life. The change process is a journey of self-discovery. And when I think of self-discovery, I think of relationships. And think about that. You can't really get to know somebody if you're speed dating. And that's kind of how I think of the diet industry. I feel like it's a speed dating service, right? It's like sit down, follow these instructions, and get a little taste of what it might be like to change your life, right? Like you get a little bit excited, but you don't really get to know yourself by dieting. And you don't really get to know somebody by speed dating. You get to know somebody by investing it over long periods of time. I mean, ask any married couple, ask anyone who's been in a relationship for many years. That relationship has evolved and deepened over time. You get to know a lot about somebody when you spend a lot of time with them and you have respect for them and you're genuinely curious about who they are and what drives them and what deflates them. And really, that's what we need to be doing for ourselves. So I always find it laughable that many people still think that a year is a long time to make impactful change in life. A year is nothing. In fact, I've always talked about, it takes at least a year to really revolutionize your health story. And that's never been a sexy sales pitch, right? Because we're used to being sold the 6-week program, the better body in 12 weeks, 30 days to 30 pounds of weight loss. So coming in and telling people that, hold your horses. The reality is it takes a lot longer has never been a great sales pitch, right? But that is the work I sell, is how do we actually change behavior for the long haul? And I'm even going to go a step further and say that, I think it's really a powerful exercise to consider how different your life could be in not just a year, but in 10 years, right? We've entered this new decade, 2020. And of course, I know there's a lot flying around the internet about, where were you 10 years ago? And if you just pause and consider that for a minute, it is a powerful question. Because I know for me, 10 years ago, I was not a mother. I did not have a podcast. I didn't even have an online business. I was still very much a brick and mortar business. So at the start of this podcast today, I really want you to pause and just consider, where do you want to be? Not at the end of 2020, but where do you want to be at the end of 2030? And how can you use this year to pay tribute, right? And in devotion to where you want to be at the end of the next decade. Dream big. What do you really, really want for your life? Because ladies, it's very easy to consider what you don't want for your life. I feel like a lot of women spend a lot of time there. But really do yourself a favor and consider what you do want for your life. What are the things that you currently have that you want to maintain in your life? And what are the things about your life that you'd like to change? I always call it like the practice of renovation, right? Now, here's a hard truth, right? Whatever you want that you don't currently have is going to require that you take action. Not just for a few days or a few weeks, but consistently. And taking action consistently is going to require self-confidence. And in my opinion, self-confidence is faith in yourself to show up, to do what needs to be done to get to where you want to go. And lucky for you, the entire theme on the podcast this month is self-confidence. So the first episode that aired, which was episode 194, was all about how to fortify your self-confidence and why it should be your number one goal in 2020. And then this past week, I ran a workshop inside the Women of Grace and Grit Facebook community called Ignite Your Self-Confidence, where I got a little bit more into actual strategies that will help you to bolster your self-confidence. And if you missed that workshop and you still would like access to it, it's totally available to you. So you can head over to graceandgrit.com/ignite and just enter your name and email. And we'll send you the replay of that workshop, and we'll also send you the companion guide that goes alongside it. And I also want to tell you here and now, before I get into the nitty-gritty of today's podcast, that I am running a free masterclass in February. I will hold it on 2 dates, the 2nd and the 6th of February. It's called Make It Stick. I've run this masterclass many times before. People really seem to get a lot out of it. And it's all about how behavior change really works. So if you are someone who is just done with dieting and you're done with the quick fixes and you're done with beating your head against the wall and you really want to learn how behavior change works, I would encourage you to come to the masterclass. So you can register for that at graceandgrit.com/make-it-stick. And if you ever get confused about where to go to get what you need, you can always email me at Courtney@graceandgrit.com. So why I chose the theme of self-confidence this month is really kind of twofold. So I'm a big believer that self-confidence is what helps us to take action. And of course, on the other side of action, we always also grow our self-confidence. So self-confidence matters a lot when we're talking about behavior change. And I also chose this theme because I really operate from the place that improving health is an exercise in self-leadership. And self-confidence is a really big part of that. And here's the truth. You don't develop self-confidence in a few weeks or a few months. Again, it's the long game. We develop self-confidence by spending time with ourselves and being curious about ourselves, learning what works and what doesn't work. It's not a speed dating process. So today I want to talk about unraveling the code to confidence. And I just finished reading the Confidence Code, The full title is The Confidence Code, The Science and Art of Self-Reassurance, What Women Should Know. And it's a book written by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman. I definitely recommend it. It was a really great read. I'll just kind of read you a little synopsis off the back of the book. It says, in The Confidence Code, journalists Katty Kay and Claire Shipman travel to the frontiers of neuroscience on a hunt for the confidence gene and reveal surprising new research on its roots in our brains. They visit the world of leading psychologists who explain how we can all choose to become more confident simply by taking action and courting risk, and how those actions change our physical wiring. They interview women leaders from the worlds of politics, sports, the military, and the arts to learn how they have tapped into this elemental resource. They examine how a lack of confidence impacts our leadership, success, and fulfillment. In terms of how this relates to health, in the book, they say that scholars are coming to see self-confidence as an essential element of internal well-being and happiness, essential for a fulfilled life. Again, I personally thought it was a great read. It's backed up by some really interesting studies and research. And today I want to share with you a few things I've learned. So the first thing I want to share is there is this conception that there's a difference in confidence between men and women. Please don't hear me saying men don't struggle with confidence. That's not what I'm saying. But there is a thought that there is a difference between men and women's confidence. And there's a lot of research to show that this is actually not just an idea. It's very valid. It's true. There is a confidence gap between men and women, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But I will just kind of point out a few things that were mentioned in the book, that women have a tendency to want to see the entire pathway before taking the first step, where men are much quicker to fail, if you will. They're much quicker to take the next step, even if they don't do it perfectly. The book also highlights that women have more of a tendency to tell themselves stories that they have to do it perfectly. And so therefore, we can much more easily get stuck in a state of paralysis in terms of not taking action because we think we have to execute it perfectly or not do it at all. So it kind of leans into that all or nothing thinking. The book also talks about the studies that show that women are more likely to make failure mean something about them as a person than making it mean that there's something wrong with their strategy. So men are more likely to look at, why didn't it work? What is wrong with my strategy? And as women, we have more of a tendency to ask ourselves, what's wrong with me? So I want to read you just a little passage from the intro of the book. In the most basic terms, what we need to do is start acting and risking and failing, and stop mumbling and apologizing and prevaricating. It isn't that women don't have the ability to succeed. It is that we don't seem to believe that we can succeed, and that stops us from even trying. Women are so keen to get everything just right that we are terrified of getting something wrong. But if we don't take risks, we will never reach the next level. And I know that when I read that, it's so relatable because there are so many spaces in my life where that is 100% true. Because let's face it, ladies, there's areas of our life where it's a lot more easy to be confident. And why is that? Well, it's not really a mystery. There's areas of your life that you have spent more time and energy on. You've had more practice in those areas. So of course you're going to have more confidence. And I find this to be really true of taking better care of ourselves, right? Improving our relationship with exercise can be really hard for a woman who hasn't spent a lot of time practicing exercise. But it's hard because it's just new and it's not an area she has spent a lot of time in. The next point I want to bring up in this book that I thought was really powerful is, and probably not surprising, but I still think it's worth mentioning and reminding us all of, that we really need to think less and act more. Women have more of a tendency than men to brood. So we process. We literally have more brain matter in the prefrontal cortex of our brain. And I learned this in the book. I thought that was really powerful to know because the prefrontal cortex is where we think. It's where we think a lot, right? And women, because we have more brain matter there, we tend to process and process and process to the point of not acting. So action is the only way, of course, that we are going to create any kind of change in our life. And I find, working with a lot of women over the years, and of course, being a woman myself, it's really easy to take passive action, right? Passive action is, again, it's reading the book, listening to the podcast, signing up for a course, doing some research, but it's not really putting rubber to the road. Rubber to the road is massive action. It doesn't mean it has to be a big action, but massive action refers to something that actually gets you somewhere. It either gets you closer to your goal or it gets you into a space and place of realizing that your strategy might be flawed. It moves you in a direction. So I've asked this question before on the podcast, but I would encourage you to ask yourself again, what kind of action are you taking in order to change your life? Is it just passive or is it massive? This podcast, although I think it's an amazing well of resources for women, and of course I encourage people to listen to it, but nothing on this podcast matters if you aren't actually applying what you learn. So confidence is linked to doing. And again, from years and years of experience of working with women, I believe that the journey between thinking and doing is a million miles for a lot of women, right? We can think, we can process, we can understand, we can absorb content, and we can, of course, act. But what if you gave yourself permission to act more often, to take risk faster, to not spend so much time in the decision-making process? There's a quote I want to read from the book on this topic, and it says, "The resonance of mastery is in the process and progress. It is about work and learning to develop an appetite for challenge." And I think for a lot of us, challenge can bring up so many difficult emotions. And if we don't have the tools to properly manage our emotional landscape, we just won't take action. The next thing I want to bring out from this book is they do a great job of talking about what they call the cousins of confidence. So these are other qualities that we can develop to help support our self-confidence. And the first one they mention is self-esteem, which in my, I guess, verbiage, I think of as self-respect. I think they're very, very similar. So self-esteem or self-respect is basically the belief that you are a person of value and you feel good about yourself. You are lovable, and that just by being human, you have value. where self-confidence is often tied to what we can achieve. But I believe on the spectrum, or on the sort of the development of self-confidence, we have to start with self-respect. Because if we don't start with self-respect or self-esteem, as the authors suggest, we're not really going to have any initiative. We're not going to take any initiative to show up for ourselves, right? And if we don't show up, we can't take action. Another cousin of confidence is optimism, which, if anyone has read Carol Dweck's work, the book Mindset, it's the growth mindset. That's what optimism is. It's looking for the good in things, trusting that things will work out, trusting that things are working in your favor. And, in my opinion, optimism has everything to do with the tape that's playing in your head. So again, if you don't have tools for managing your mindset and the way you think, it can be really easy to go down a rabbit hole of the fixed mindset, which is, it's sort of doom and gloom and feeling like your abilities are set and aren't really changeable. So optimism is a really big piece of growing your self-confidence, as is self-compassion. And again, self-compassion has a lot to do with how you talk to yourself, especially when things get challenging, when things get difficult, when you mess up, when you make a mistake. And I have done countless podcasts on self-compassion. Another cousin of confidence is courage. Courage is critical. And what is courage? Well, at the most basic level, courage is taking action even when you're scared, right? Taking action even though self-doubt might be sitting in the passenger seat. And I don't know of anyone who speaks to courage more beautifully than Brené Brown. So if you want a little bit more help fortifying courage, number one, I would say take more action, especially around things that make you a little scared. But also, I would definitely read up on her material, right? But remember, just reading her book, like if you read Daring Greatly or you read Rising Strong or The Gifts of Imperfection, those are all titles of her books. Definitely read it. I think it can be helpful. But reading is passive. It's not going to get you anywhere. So what are you going to do daily to help fortify courage? Because courage, again, is a really essential element of self-confidence. Because courage, ultimately, if you think about it, it leads to trust. When you take action, even though you're scared, and you start creating new possibility for your life, you start trusting yourself more that you are capable. You can figure it out. Even if you make mistakes and falter, you can still rise and conquer. That's what trust is, and the only way we can get to trust is if we're willing to be courageous. Another point that they bring up in the book that I think is very worth mentioning is that at the core level, what the authors present confidence as is the stuff that turns thoughts into action. And they say these words exactly, that confidence is life's enabler, professionally, intellectually, athletically, socially. Confidence is what allows us to stop playing small and live. So the way that I coach, I operate from the belief that our thoughts are what create our emotional landscape. So our emotions are directly connected to how we think. And our emotions or our feelings are what inspire action. Or cause you to not take action. And of course, action or inaction is what is going to produce results in our life. So I cannot emphasize enough the power of managing your thoughts and your emotions. Those absolutely are things that we have control over. And it is, I just think, such a tragedy that we don't teach that starting in kindergarten. Because if we learned these tools at a young age, holy cow, would that revolutionize our life? And I want to mention here now, just talking about children, that this book, The Confidence Code, they also have a version for young girls. So if you're around young girls, if you're a mother, if you're a teacher, it definitely may be a resource worth checking out. I have not read it, but based on the adult version of this book, I can't imagine that it isn't helpful and useful. Another thing that I want to highlight in this episode today is that hormones influence confidence. And if you are a longtime listener of this show, we've done a lot of episodes on hormonal health. And there's a lot of things that can disrupt our hormonal health, right? So, so many things. Anything really can influence your hormonal health. But some of the big players are things like how much you're sleeping, right? Over-exercising or under-exercising, how you nourish your body in terms of food, how you manage stress, the company you keep, right? Your sense of connection. And of course, we have other factors like the shifts of aging, especially for women, right? Going through the stages of perimenopause, menopause, even adolescence. There's a lot of hormonal shifting going on there. And what I think is important to know about that is in this book, I learned that serotonin, oxytocin, and dopamine are all very closely connected to our degree of confidence. So serotonin is our happy and calm hormone, and it makes us feel resilient. And I think it's really powerful to know that a lot of serotonin is produced in the gut. So if you have a lot of gut dysfunction, you're not eating a diet that is promoting a really healthy and happy intestine, or you're under a lot of stress because there is a direct link between our brain and our gut. A lot of people refer to the gut as the second brain. But serotonin production can really get jacked up if our gut health is off kilter. So serotonin, when it is in a robust state, definitely contributes to our ability to feel more confident. Oxytocin, which a lot of you know as the love hormone. I think it's also referred to as the cuddle hormone. And it works a lot like serotonin. And what I learned in the book is that oxytocin helps to activate the prefrontal cortex, the center of higher thinking and executive function, and helps the amygdala quiet down. And the amygdala is kind of our primal brain. It's the part of our brain that, seeks pleasure, avoids pain, and wants to exert the least amount of effort. So the primal brain is there for a reason. It keeps us safe. It keeps us alive. And yet in modern day culture, it can be really problematic because let's just say that you're thinking about starting a new endeavor. You want to start a new job and you're really excited about it. And you're also simultaneously terrified. Well, your amygdala can perceive that as a threat to your survival because it doesn't really know what the threat is. It just perceives that the way you're thinking is threatening. And so it says, we really shouldn't do this. You should not pursue this new job because you might die. And that really just isn't relevant in modern day culture. So oxytocin can help to support that prefrontal cortex, that decision making. And dopamine is right, like it's what inspires action ultimately. And it kind of also inspires exploring, being willing to take risk and failure. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like we live in a culture where we're seeking out false dopamine hits. And what I mean by that is we're seeking out dopamine. We're trying to get that feeling of doing and exploring by eating, by drinking, social media, Netflix, because all of those have a dopamine response in the brain, which is why they're so addictive. But if we aren't getting dopamine in a more natural way, by taking risks, by pursuing opportunities, by leaning into hard things and overcoming them, we can really get caught up in seeking out our desire for dopamine in things that have a lot of negative consequences. I hope that makes sense. So I talk a lot about that, of course, in the work that I do with my clients, because dopamine is something that we just naturally really seek out. But how are you feeding, like what ways are you triggering dopamine releasing in your brain? Are they ways that are helpful to you, or are they things that are actually killing you? That may seem melodramatic, but ultimately over the long term, that is what's happening if we're always getting dopamine hits from food, alcohol, and all the other things that I mentioned. Another important thing I want to bring up about this book is that, yes, your self-confidence is partly coded in your genes. There is evidence of that in research. But here's the good news. Neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself, can make that very insignificant. So if you are someone who is genetically predisposed to not being very confident, if you are willing to do the things that foster confidence, it doesn't really matter. There's a saying that, a lot of people even with food and lifestyle choices, some people will say that, I'm genetically predisposed to fill in the blank. And sometimes we'll use that as a reason not to take better care of ourselves. Because we're genetically predisposed, what's the point? But there's a saying that I love, and it says, the genetics load the gun, but your lifestyle pulls the trigger. And I especially love that in this conversation because it's kind of the same thing with confidence, right? Yeah, sure. There is some pre-programming in your genes, but how you live your life has everything to do with your degree of confidence. Confidence is a practice that anybody can adopt. Another thing that I wanted to extract for you from the book is that confidence wounds are inflicted early. And especially for girls, there's some really clear research that there's this very clear shift for young girls around the age of 8, 9, or 10, where they really start to question their ability to be successful. And it comes from a lot of things, right? Our culture, of course, hormonal shifts absolutely can play a role. But this is why it is so important to teach the skills of confidence at an early age. So once again, I just want to kind of push you towards that book that I mentioned earlier, this confidence code book for girls, because I do think it's a great resource for people to tap into. And also, this will come as no surprise, but the book clearly points out that perfectionism suffocates confidence. And I want to read you a quote here because I think it's really great. It says this: of all the warped things that women do to themselves to undermine their confidence, we found the pursuit of perfection to be the most crippling. If perfection is your standard, of course, you will never be fully confident because the bar is always impossibly high, and you will inevitably and routinely feel inadequate. So, ladies, chuck the perfectionism. It needs to go. It is not helping you in any way. And I hear a lot of women almost kind of using it as a badge of honor. Well, I'm just a perfectionist. And I think it's Brooke Castillo that says that perfectionism is for scared people, right? And if you think about it, that's really in many ways true, because perfectionism is rationale for not taking action. I'm a perfectionist, so I'm just not going to do it, right? Or I'm just not going to take the risk. And then your life doesn't grow. Another really important thing from the book is that challenge is your friend. Challenge is your friend. We need to learn how to befriend challenge. And again, I'm going to pull this passage from the book. It says this: confidence, at least the part that's not in our genes, requires hard work, substantial risk, determined persistence, and sometimes bitter failure. Building it demands regular exposure to all of these things. You don't get to experience how far you can go in life, at work and everywhere else, without pushing yourself. And equally important, without being pushed along by others. Gaining confidence means getting out of your comfort zone, experiencing setbacks, and with determination, picking yourself up again. I love that. And if you feel like, again, great, Courtney, how do I start? Because you don't feel, especially in the arena of health, that you have much confidence. I want to say this to you, that again, confidence is a practice. And a smart practice is, number one, being very reasonable with your expectations and taking small actions consistently over time, which will start producing new results in your life, which will start fortifying your self-confidence. So I just want to offer you once again that I do have the masterclass that I just ran called Ignite Your Self-Confidence, where we talked a lot more about this stuff. And I gave some really specific strategies for where you can begin. And you can register for that at graceandgrit.com/ignite. And I also have the Make It Stick Masterclass coming up on the 2nd and the 6th of February. That's all about behavior change and some ways that you can make it so much easier to stay in it for the long game. And isn't that what we all want, right? We don't just want to change temporarily. We want to change how we're showing up in the world consistently over long periods of time for the rest of our life. So you can register for that masterclass again at graceandgrit.com/make-it-stick. So if you register for either one of those things, you will be notified of all other things that I offer. So it doesn't really matter which one you register for. What matters is that, you get on my email list, essentially, so we can notify you every time we have these free offers available. So I hope that was helpful to you today. I gleaned a lot from reading the Confidence Code. I definitely suggest it as reading material. But at the end of the day, I want you to remember that reading is not enough. Reading the book, reading any book, listening to any podcast, hiring any coach or trainer is not what changes your life. What changes your life is action. So ask yourself today, what am I doing today in dedication to that woman I keep saying I want to become, that version of myself I keep saying I want to be? What am I doing today? What is on my schedule today that shows that that is true? Because if you're saying you want change and change is important to you, but there's nothing on your schedule, you're misaligned. you're living out of integrity with yourself. Remember, integrity is matching up our actions with our thoughts, with what we truly want for our life. So just put a few things on your calendar today, small things, that can help you progress towards that version of yourself. All right, that's it, my friends. I hope, again, it was helpful. You can always reach out to me at Courtney@graceandgrit.com. I really appreciate your listenership. I also appreciate your reviews. Several of you have left reviews lately on iTunes, and I can't tell you that it just means so much when you take the time to do that, and it really goes a long way in helping to support the podcast. So thank you for that. And I will see you again very soon, I hope, or I will have you, in the arena listening in, I hope, in another couple weeks. Have a great day, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to the Grace and Grit podcast. It is time to mend the fabric of the female health story, and it starts with you taking radical responsibility for your own self-care. You are worth the effort, and with a little grace and grit, anything is possible.